Good everyone, and welcome to this second part of thematic session entitled Mainstreaming of Conservation Agriculture with the National Policy and the Institutional Support and for Global Governance to Support National and International Needs and Commitments. The topic of this session is relevant importance for the conservation agriculture and not require further additions. There are 7 presentations that already appear extremely interesting for the novelty in approach and the new evidence for adoption and the spread of conservation agriculture in several agroecological conditions. Considering the virtual modality of the Congress, 6 of these are recorded, and therefore we should be able to respect the time allotted in order to have the time available for discussion and mutual exchange of questions, comments, and opinions. Let's start with the first speaker, Emilio González-Sánchez by University of Cordoba in Spain and also by ICAF. Emilio is assistant professor and with accreditation as associate professor at the Department of Agricultural Engineering, Agroforestry Engineering area at the University of Cordoba, and have several years of experience in conservation agriculture, no-till, crop rotation, and the permanent soil cover, with a special focus on climate change mitigation. Emilio presents the relation about sustainable use of glyphosate in conservation agriculture. Please, Emilio.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear participants of the 8th World Congress on Conservation Agriculture. It's my pleasure being here with you today to talk about the sustainable use of glyphosate in conservation agriculture. I would like to start my presentation by addressing some of the key elements that have been published by the European Parliament in a recent resolution. 95% of our food is directly or indirectly produced from our soils. But at the same time, we know that soils are suffering from different problems. Erosion is affecting about 25%. It's way higher than what can be naturally replaced. About 60 to 70% of the European soils are unhealthy. The depletion in organic matter and carbon is causing higher emissions and is not helping us to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And there is a high susceptibility to compaction in our soils, which in the end may turn into more tillage. Sustainable management is needed in Europe to prevent desertification, which the climatic models are telling that it will be a reality in Southern Europe by 2050. And the economic losses around these soil degradations are very high. On the one hand, we can find tangible losses that are due to loss of agricultural production, about 1 billion euro per year, but there are some others due to inaction on soil degradation, about 50 billion per year. We might not be paying that economically, but for sure environmentally. Restoration costs are 10 times higher than prevention costs. So it's much better to invest. For instance, in conservation agriculture, we are seeing in this Congress all the benefits, economic, environmental, social benefits that conservation agriculture brings, and that it's essential to address the key threats to soils in Europe. The room for improvement is very high. In this map from the Eurostat, we see that there is little adoption of conservation agriculture in Europe compared to other regions. Even if the adoption is increasing, it's very hard to find places or regions with more than 15%. So in most of the places and the regions and countries, we find it less than 5-10% of adoption. And this in turn is happening. This is what's happening. We find, due to this lack of adoption, we are facing a lot of erosion, runoff problems, and different crops. And if those problems are in one isolated farm, maybe the farmer is the only one realizing that this is happening. But when rainy events and next to water bodies, erosion is there, runoff is there, society might be aware of that something is not working well in our agricultural system. This is my hometown, Cordoba. After a very rainy season, what we found was a lot of sediments in the river, and not only sediments, but also fertilizer and whatever input that was applied in the soil. To control weeds and prepare the seedbed, we are facing in most of the European lands the origin of soil degradation, which is soil tillage. It depends, irrespective of the intensity of tillage, when soil structure is destroyed, is more likely that we find erosion and transport of sediments elsewhere. Farming is not a fairy tale, and we know that through mechanical controls, farmers can effectively control weeds, but we've seen all the problems that this may entail. So that's why we believe that it's important that farmers know how the weeds are in the soil profile. The distribution of weed seeds is different if we are in a zero tillage or no tillage, where in topsoil we'll find most of the seeds, whereas in the conventional tillage or deep tillage, the weed seeds might be more mixed in the soil profile. When we keep on tilling, seeds here might be here next season. So this creates a never-ending problem with weeds. The theoretical effect of tillage tell us that the longer the period in no tillage, the less the pressure of the weeds. And this, which is a theoretical study, we've seen it in the many fields at practical level. We have the principles of conservation agriculture working for us. We use glyphosate as to control weeds before seeding, but something that is also helping us to reduce the pressure of weeds is, besides no tillage, the crop residues that prevent the emergence of weeds, and also the crop rotations. We see legumes, we see here cereals, and the point is that by mixing and by rotating crops, we break cycles and we can use different strategies to control weeds. That, in the end, is a picture of the farm of the University of Cordoba. That, in the end, is the final picture. After 10 years of conservation agriculture, you can see here on the left-hand side of the picture the pressure of weeds just before seeding, whereas in conventional farming, even after the 2-3 plow passes, we will need to use herbicide. On the left-hand side, we've used 1.5 liters of glyphosate, and on the right-hand side, in the end, on top of tilling, we will have to use herbicides to control weeds because the window for seeding is very narrow. ICAF gathered the information on the sustainable use of glyphosate or judicious use of glyphosate on a report last year, where 1,700 participants from 21 countries contributed to the study. This study was co-financed by ICAF and Bayer on behalf of the GRG, and ICAF declared no conflict of interest as Bayer had no role in the design, collection, analysis, interpretation of data, in the writing of the report, or in the decision to publish the result. Farmers participating were well experienced, more than 10 years, 85% of the cases. And we asked them, how do you control weeds before crop establishment? Most of them used herbicides, but some of them also use, of course, mechanical control, tillage. Some of those would, in the end, also probably had to use herbicide. So this is not a conflicting answer. What it was nice is that about 20% used integrated weed management. Irrespective of the soil management system, glyphosate is broadly used in our fields. not only in no-tillage, but also min-till, conventional tillage, and also in ground cover in permanent crops. Those are pictures of no-till fields with a lot of residues, with different type of crops. We have cotton, we have sunflower, we have a winter cereal, this is wheat. And in all cases, what you don't see is wheat problems. The wheat pressure is low because we are implementing the principles of conservation agriculture. And the same happens here. If you grow grasses in between the tree lines, it's more unlikely you will have a high pressure of weeds, because we are helping prevail the most interesting species for us. Why do farmers use glyphosate? Because it's effective, it's simple, it has a good control, again, irrespective of the soil management system. And this is very interesting because farmers are using glyphosate mostly in pre-emergence. That's very important because they are using it months ahead harvest. That's helping reduce any type of problems at the end of the season. And something that it's normally or is as a general understanding, people think that conservation agriculture increases the use of glyphosate, because if you are not plowing to control the weeds, you will have to use herbicide, and that's true. But the principles of conservation agriculture are helping us to optimize the use of herbicides, including glyphosate. And you see here, there are no statistical differences. Even the average is a little bit lower in conservation agriculture in no-tillage than in conventional tillage. So this is in strip-till, farmers use even less because of this light disturbance of soil in the row of the crop. This is just for wide row crops. But you see that as average, we are talking about, depending on the region, in Europe, we are talking about 1.3, 1.1, 1.2 grams per hectare of glyphosate. So there are not the big differences and statistically differences in the regions. If farmers didn't have glyphosate, what would they do? And this is worrying. In fact, in Mediterranean and Northern European countries, they don't know what to do because they don't find a cost-effective alternative. And mostly in Central Europe, they would intensify tillage, which also will happen in the Mediterranean and Northern European countries. And this is quite worrying, because that would mean, or that would involve, the loss of all the productivity, economic, environmental, and social benefits that we know conservation agriculture brings to our society. Glyphosate is judiciously used in conservation agriculture. That's a major conclusion. CA environment is much better than the conventional one. There might be a shift to preceding rather than post-emergent treatments, because we know that the conservation agriculture residues on top of soil are helping control weeds. The lack of glyphosate would probably result in an intensification of tillage, bringing all the problems we've talked about at the beginning of the presentation. We need to help farmers because they don't find a cost-efficient alternative. And instead of intensifying tillage, we need to intensify the principles of conservation agriculture. We need to intensify the benefits of conservation agriculture for Europe. Thank you for listening. I will be very happy to answer your questions in the Q&A session. Thank you very much for your listening, and see you soon.
Thank you, Emilio, for your nice presentation. Very clear. Is very important to hear the comparison and to have the results on glyphosate in European Union, because we have the perception is very, very different. We have many questions in discussion session. The second speaker is Professor Karim Houmy. Professor Karim Houmy is a FAO international consultant working on a crucial role of farm power and of innovative and efficient mechanization solutions, and the importance of appropriating them of the context of smallholder farmers. As I've been involved in several FAO projects, particularly in formulating agricultural mechanization strategy for African countries. Professor Houmy present the capacity development of agricultural mechanization, higher service providers, opportunity for promoting conservation agriculture. Please, Professor Houmy.
Thank you, Chairman. Are you hearing me very well? It's okay?
The microphone yes? too close, please.
Yes. Now it's okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I am very pleased to participate to this World Congress on Conservation Agriculture. And in this presentation, I will be talking about agricultural mechanization, higher service provision as opportunities for agricultural development in general and for promoting conservation agriculture in particular. So the main point that we'll be discussing after a presentation of introduction, objectives and methodology, will be focusing mainly on the typology of different higher service providers' business models. Then making a comparison between these business models and to explain what their implication on the adoption of different business models, and to finishing with focusing on success factors. So I think all agree that how to say the main challenges to be addressed for agricultural transformation in sub-Saharan Africa is how to make machinery and equipment more accessible to farmers. Now that the most of farmers are smallholder farmers, and therefore they are having the capacity to invest in equipment. And this challenge is also crucial for development conservation agriculture. As discussed yesterday in the plenary sessions, they focused on the role of mechanization and accessibility mainly for smallholder farmers. So in this context, FAO and with collaboration with ACT conducted 2 years ago a capacity development program by inviting higher service providers into regional workshops to share their experiences, say peer-to-peer training. So the objective of this study is to showcase a variety of business models of private sector, dealing mainly in higher service agriculture mechanization, higher service provision, and to compare between these business models, and as I said before, to identify the success factors. So for these 2 regional workshops that we have organized, the first one, it was in Côte d'Ivoire with the participation in Benin, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Morocco, and Senegal. And the second one, it was held in Uganda with the participation of Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Zambia. And I would like to mention here that this workshop, it was also a way to collect data from the different for different participants. The second point also is very important, that prior to these workshops, we have conducted a selection process to be sure that we have diversity of higher service providers, and also to be sure that for example, women and youth are well represented. And it was done according to some criteria. So the second point in our methodology, and to understand, to describe, and to highlight the main features of this high service providers, we have used what we call it Canvas tools. This is this very powerful tool to understand and, as we say, to analyze these models, and to see exactly how they are creating, how they are delivering, and how they are capturing values. So now let's go to this typology of these different business models. So you have used two variables. The first variable is ownership of the businesses, and the second is type of the services provided. And according to these variables, we have identified 5 types of business models. So let's start to present each business model. So the first one, let's say, is classical business model. It means that when they are farmers, they have the capacity to invest in equipment, but the motivation of their investment is not to making profit, but essentially to meet their own needs. And this business models sparks a little interest for us and for our objectives, as it didn't add any value because it's a part of general issue of agricultural mechanization. Now let's present the second model, which is very interesting. It's group service providers, and we have seen many experience. One of the very success story of experiences was in Benin, and this is a good way to pool the farmers' resources and to increase access to agricultural mechanization services. They cover all operation in the agricultural value chain. That means from land preparation to processing and transport and so on. And the motivation for creation these groups is not making profit, but is to meet members' need in an equitable manner. The third business model is entrepreneurs, and is different because they are investing equipment to making profits, and this is very interesting means for farmers. To making profits, and we will detail a little bit during this presentation. But what's very important for these models, providers are more linked to agricultural activities. It means, for example, there is some of them, they are providing services in agricultural mechanization, but also they are providing services in other activities, as for example, selling inputs as fertilizers, pesticides, or some of them also are buying farmers' products. And so it's very interesting to facilitate some transaction between farmers and between higher service providers. The fourth business model, that is also these higher service providers, but instead to be linked to agricultural services activities, are more linked to machinery, agricultural mechanization supply chain. And this has some different features because they are controlling very well all the supply chain and mainly controlling maintenance and spare parts and so on. So this is the main difference, and they are also working mainly only on farm operations. And the last business model is is as an intermediary hire service by using a digital platform, and the objective was how to link farmers with tractor owners or with hire service providers. So this is the 5 models that we have identified during this workshop that we have organized. Now let's make a comparison between these business models. As I said before, according to this Canvas tools, and this Canvas tools is based on mapping nine what we call it building blocks, and facilitate for us to understand, as I said before, how these business models work. So we haven't enough time to go in details for each for each building blocks, but let's explain some very relevant points very interesting for us and with relation with conservation and agriculture. So the first one is what we call it is customer segments. And the most of these business models, the customers are, of course, small-scale farmers, but also small-scale farmers groups, and also large-scale farmers. But what is very challenging for these business models is the condition of work. I mean, for example, the cash flow is very important, because what we have noticed at the beginning of the campaign, agriculture campaign, farmers usually they haven't enough money to pay. And this is really a problem, but we have noticed some innovation from higher services to help and to how to say, to be paid during, for even the harvesting season. This is one example. The second challenge also, their farmers are very small with the fragmentation of plots, and this is also one of the very issue to optimizing the use of equipment. So the second building block, and this is the most important for me, is what we call it this value proposition. And if we compare between the different business models, of course, the model 2 and 3 cover all activities, and we say all services, let's say all services. But the model 4, as I said, the model which is linked only in supply chain is offering only, how to say, on-farm operation. The model 5, it is the linkage, how to say, the intermediary between farmers and tractor owners. They're also offering only, how to say, on-farm operation. But what is very interesting is model 3, because model 3, as I said, there's more diversification, are involved more in agriculture activities. So they are also, how to say, reinforcing the link between farmers and high service providers. And some of them that we have noticed, they are also providing, how to say, advisory. I mean, they are helping, supporting farmers to change their practices, and also there's a potential, I mean, to promote conservation agriculture. As I said, they are diversifying their activities, but there's a more link between these highest providers and farmers. So the other building blocks are also, let's say, very important. I go quickly. This delivery channels that we have noticed some innovation. For example, we have some women with processing, they are moving where their equipment from village to village, and that is very interesting as business models. The other point I saw is very important also, this relation with customers as very important. There are some, how to say, models are developing or forcing this relation. And what is very important is revenue stream, how the higher service are paid. Of course, they are paid according to the services, but we have noticed also some of them are paid in kind, and that's very important also. For higher service providers, as I said, when they are also, for example, involved in agriculture activities, they are selling products, so they are also, for example, buying products. So it's very interesting that it can be paid in kind, and then they are using that to buying these products in the market. So other building blocks is the key resources. So I don't want to go to details, but this is very important, mainly for model 3, 4, and 5, because you need entrepreneurial skill for management. But for example, for model 4, 5, for example, in digitalization, they need some skills in how to say, in computer science, in digitalization. That is very important. So one of the building block is very important is activities, but also it depends on this kind of business models that we have identified. The other one is partner, developing partners, and you have noticed there is mainly the model 3, 4, and 5 developing many partners with banks, for example, with the farmers organization, and also some of them are also developing partners with agriculture ministries, and that's also very important. And one also very important case that we have in Benin, as I said, for the cooperative, there is, how to say, many partners developed with this farmers organization, but also for NGOs and for other partners. And the last one for this building blocks, but it's very important, that is the cost, but generally is the same if you compare between business models. So to finishing this presentation, I will focus maybe in what are the main success factors. So as I said, the first one is entrepreneurial skills and leadership. That is very important. But we have noticed mainly in model 3, 4, and 5. And the other one is sorry, I don't see the presentation, the PowerPoint, but anyway, I can see it in my computer. So the other success factor, as I said, and this is very important, is diversification of mitigation services. I mean, if one business model based only on higher service is not for us, is not viable. But this reason why we notice that all the business models that we have identified, they are diversifying their activities, not only in mechanization, but also in some agricultural activities. And that is very important. Another success factor is involvement of farmers' organization. This is very important. What we have noticed that farmers' organizations are playing a very important role. So in some cases, as intermediary between providers and between farmers. The other success story that we have noticed also is the linkage between processor, and this can be as how to say contract farming. That's pre-financing the higher service providers, and when we have the how to say the processors, we have the banks also involved, and this is very interesting to how to say to facilitate the higher service providers to doing their businesses. The other success factors, of course, is the profitability that we have noticed in only some crops with high value as rice and maize, because they generate more income and farmers, they are allowed to pay the services. Access to finance, that is very important. And finally, the infrastructure, and the infrastructure, different kind of infrastructure. For example, of model 5, connectivity is very important because it's a digital platform and it needs connectivity. So to finish my presentation by concluding, to say that we have identified 5 types of business models that summarize all business models exist in sub-Saharan Africa. And this canvas tool is very powerful, enables to understand the situation of service providers, and the comparison provide us to the insight into why and how to adopt a specific business more based on context, on the local context. Sorry. And the last point that is very important: this canvas tools allows also to how to say to design and to be more innovative and create business models. And we know that in Africa there is a huge potential for improvement for these high services. And thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Professor Houmy. Very interesting presentation. I think is very important for small farmers for to propose different business models and service. Thank you again. Next speaker is, please, next speaker, Óscar Veroz-González, by Spanish Association of Conservation Agriculture Living Soils. Óscar is an agricultural engineer and working at the University of Córdoba, and now is executive director of Spanish Association for Conservation Agricultural Living Soil. from 2005. Veroz-González has experience in sustainable agriculture and land management based on principle of conservation agriculture. I asked Óscar to present the Life Agromitiga, development of climate change mitigation strategy through carbon smart agriculture. Please.
Good morning,
Please,
everybody.
Óscar.
First of all, I would like to thank the Scientific Committee of the Congress for giving me the opportunity to present the Life Agromitiga project, development of climate change mitigation strategies through carbon smart agriculture. Let us start with some basic information about the project, mentioning that it is an initiative co-financed by the European Union through the LIFE program. The project, with a duration of over 4 years, has a budget of more than 2.7 million euros, and its actions are being carried out in Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Greece. Although there are dissemination actions, like this Congress, which go beyond these countries, covering a wider area. As you can see in the slide, this is a project in which several entities are involved, from non-profit organizations to research organizations and public administrations. LIFE projects aim specifically at contributing to the implementation, updating, and development of European Union environmental and climate policy and legislation, including the integration of the environment into other policies, and so contributing to sustainable development. This is why we cannot forget the legislative context in which we are moving. In that sense, 2015, the Paris Agreement marked the beginning of new commitments to be fulfilled by the signatory countries in terms of reducing greenhouse gases emissions. Under the framework of the Paris Agreement, the 4,000 initiative promoted by the French government was launched. This initiative directly affects the agricultural sector, as it promotes the application of carbon sequestering agricultural practices such as conservation agriculture. On a global level, we must also highlight the Sustainable Development Goals, an initiative promoted by the United Nations. Most of the goals are related to agriculture, setting the agricultural agendas of the countries. In Europe, the European Green Deal has recently emerged, an initiative to address the major climate and environmental challenges facing the European Union in the coming years. The Farm to Fork strategy and the biodiversity strategy, which set specific targets for reducing greenhouse gases emissions and the use of agricultural inputs, emanate from this European Green Deal. And finally, we must not forget to mention the Common Agricultural Policy, in whose reform process we are not immersed, and which is the policy that shapes the European agricultural landscape. In this sense, the European Union has proposed conservation agriculture as an agricultural practice to be considered as eligible in the eco-scheme within the so-called carbon farming. The project focuses on soil organic carbon and the use of conservation agriculture to increase the soil's sink effect through CO2 sequestration. This is why we can take a quick look at the importance of soils as a carbon store and their potential to mitigate climate change. Soils with 3 times more carbon than the atmosphere are recognized as the second largest store of this element on the planet after the oceans. The problem comes when, due to unsustainable agricultural practices, part of this carbon is lost through erosion and degradation processes. In agricultural ecosystem, it is estimated that the stock of soil organic carbon has been reduced by between 25% and 75%, depending on climate, soil type, and soil management. The good news is that we can restore some of this carbon through conservation agriculture. So, the Life Agromitiga project endorses this premise, and with the aim of contributing to a low-carbon agricultural system, it promotes the implementation of conservation agriculture in both herbaceous and body crops. The project, through its action, is demonstrating how, thanks to the use of this type of practices, the carbon content in the soil is increased while reducing greenhouse gases emissions, providing agents of the agricultural sector with tools used to quantify mentioned increase and adopt practices such as no-tillage or ground covers. To this end, the Life Agromitiga project is carrying out three types of action. The first one, implementation actions, like development of a methodology for the quantification of the carbon footprint in the agronomic phase of the crop that takes into account conservation agriculture, development of an APP capable of estimating the carbon content in the soil by taking photographs of the soil through mobile devices, and implementation of conservation agriculture at pilot scale, regional scale, and transnational scale. We have monitoring action where we are assessing the increase of soil organic carbon in the monitored farms, among other sustainability indicators. And finally, we have several dissemination actions like seminars, congresses, online courses, and field days. In this presentation, I'm going to focus on the preliminary results that are being generated at regional scale, and to do so, I'm going to describe the methodology followed so far. One of the first tasks carried out at regional scale was the agroclimatic zoning of the study region, taking into account variables such as climate, soil, and land use. As a result, 16 zones were identified, of which 8 were selected for their interest from an agricultural point of view. For each zone, farms were identified with the most representative crops for each of them, selecting at least one under conservation agriculture and one under conventional tillage in order to be able to make comparisons between them. The result was the establishment of a network of 36 demonstration farms, and in the table you can see the main figures of this network. And here you have several images of some of the selected farms. As you can see, there are body crops with ground covers, with covers of planting remains, and farms with herbaceous crops, under no-till and under conventional tillage. To date, in all agroclimatic zones, higher carbon contents have been observed in the soil managed by conservation agriculture. The graph shows preliminary results from 2 arable farms, one under no-tillage and the other one under conventional tillage. We can see how the soil organic carbon content is higher in conservation agriculture. In addition, the results of the analysis at different moments of the season show how the soil organic carbon content in no-till has increased by 13% since the beginning of the project. In body crops, in all cases, the farms that have used ground covers have shown higher organic carbon contents on the surface. As an example, we have this farm located in the agroclimatic zone 2. In this case, the soil with ground cover have up to 47%, or 30% more organic carbon than the soils under conventional tillage for the depths of 0 to 5 centimeters and 5 to 10 centimeters. But it's not only important to consider the management system to assess its effect on the increase in the soil carbon content, but it can be also influenced by the climatic condition and edaphic characteristics. Therefore, comparisons are made for the same crop and management system between different agroclimatic sectors. The results show that the climatic characteristics greatly influence the carbon content in the soil with the same crop and the same management system, showing values in a climatic area that are double than those in another area. This only highlights the potential of some areas compared to others for the implementation of conservation agriculture practices, offering information on the areas where to prioritize the implementation of strategies that promote carbon sequestration as a mitigation measure. Although the project still has a long way to go and a large amount of data to analyze, the results we are obtaining are in line with the conclusion reached in other similar initiatives. Conservation agriculture is able to mitigate climate change through the application of 3 principles. The rates of carbon sequestration vary according to climate conditions, but are all positive in conservation agriculture. Through a broad implementation of conservation agriculture, the agricultural sector would offset a part of greenhouse gases emissions from other productive sectors. And finally, conservation agriculture would be a smart investment for government to achieve international agreements. That concludes my speech, in the hope that it has been of interest to you, and I thank you for your attention. I remain at your disposal for any questions you may have during question time.
Thank you very much, Oscar. Very, very interesting, these preliminary results on this very important project for the future of conservation agriculture at European level, with the mirror for the world experience. The next speaker is Beth Sauerhaft from American Farmland Trust, USA. Dr. Sauerhaft is a sustainability expert with a PhD in arid land agroforestry, was worked in public, private, and non-profit sector, and is very interesting the presentation on multi-pronged theory of change drivers successful or conservation agricultural systems. Please, Beth.
Good morning. My name is Beth Sauerhaft, and I'm the Vice President of Programs at American Farmland Trust. I'd like to share with you the American Farmland Trust multi-pronged theory of change and how it drives successful conservation agriculture systems. We are facing multiple threats to ag production in the United States and much of the world. We are losing ecosystem services associated with farm and ranch land, as evidenced by disappearing wildlife habitat, water quality impairment, increased competition for a finite water supply, dwindling numbers of pollinators, and more. Between 2001 and 2016, 11 million acres of farm and ranch land were converted to urban and highly developed land use or low-density residential land use in the United States. This is equal to 2,000 acres of ag land converted per day to uses that threaten the future of agriculture, or an equivalent of all the U.S. farmland devoted to fruit, nut, and vegetable production in 2017. In short, this is some of our most productive, versatile, and resilient land. With every acre of farmland we lose, we not only lose the ability of that land to provide ecosystem services, but we also put more pressure on the remaining land to be farmed more intensively, further reducing these ecosystem services. At the same time, 40% of U.S. ag land will change hands in the next 15 years due to the aging landowner population. To combat these threats, AFT takes a comprehensive approach to conservation agriculture with 3 levers of change. We work with farmers and their partners to implement regenerative practices, a way of farming or ranching that builds soil health, sequesters carbon, improves water quality, and provides other environmental benefits while also supporting thriving, diverse, and equitable rural communities. We recognize that both protection of farm and ranch land and the transfer of these lands to new and beginning farmers and ranchers is critical to the survival of agriculture, because the only way we'll retain sufficient land to manage for agricultural production is if we attract and train a new generation of farmers and ranchers. And without these lands and the new generation to work them, we won't have sufficient land for food, fiber, and fuel production. The challenge, as always, is driving impact with these levers of change. So we lubricate them with 3 tools or approaches. We carry out research and develop tools to quantify actual or potential impacts of our actions. This is vital for both developing smart approaches and for getting traction and buy-in from public leaders, partners, and others. We work on the ground with farmers and ranchers, land trust planners, and others. This is where change happens, but also where the best new ideas are often born. And we bring together disparate groups to engage in advocacy because we know that public policy sets the terms and provides the funding and incentive needed to achieve solutions at scale. Given the short amount of time allotted for the presentation, I'll only focus on the regenerative ag lever of change and do it by focusing on examples relevant to meeting the challenges posed by climate change. To combat climate change and keep planetary warming well below 2 degrees centigrade, as outlined by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, conserving farmland, increasing the amount of carbon sequestered, and reducing agricultural greenhouse gas emissions are essential to mitigating climate change and increasing climate resilience. To do this holistically, we need widespread adoption of regenerative farming practices and sufficient farmland and enough farmers and ranchers who are trained in everything they need to know to succeed in farming for the long term. AFT has promoted soil health and regenerative practices with farmers and ranchers since our inception over 40 years ago. Over time, the focus has shifted from solely improving soil health for productivity and water quality's sake to multiple co-benefits, including carbon sequestration, reducing carbon emissions, and improving farm operation resilience. Adoption of regenerative ag practices is a low-cost, ready-to-deploy approach to combat the climate crisis on a meaningful scale. However, it's not happening fast enough, so we're bringing our multifaceted approach or set of tools to bear. We are quantifying the impacts of regen practices on soil health, climate benefits, and farm operation economics through on-farm research and modeling. We evaluate and develop new decision support tools to help guide decision-making from the field scale to the federal level. For example, using our CARPE tool developed by AFT in partnership with a scientist at USDA's Ag Research Service, we can estimate net carbon associated with different scenarios of soil health practices adopted on U.S. farm and ranch land. With this tool, we evaluated a near-term scenario in which farmers in select Corn Belt and southeastern states maintain existing practices and grow cover crops on an additional 15% of row crop acres and adopt no-till or strip-till on 25% of acres currently managed with intensive or reduced tillage. Up to 97 million metric tons of CO2 equivalents would be removed from the atmosphere annually in this scenario. We shared this evaluation in a recently released report, Combating Climate Change on U.S. Cropland, so others, including policymakers, can benefit from our work. As we know, farming is a risky business in which farmers encounter and try to control for numerous uncertainties on a regular basis. So even though many believe the scientific evidence that soil health practices improve soil and water quality, they may also be reluctant to change management techniques without knowing how much implementation will cost or benefit them. To help inform these decisions and mitigate some of the unknowns, we worked with a handful of farmers who have successfully implemented soil health practices and conducted cost-benefit analyses. We used a partial budget analysis to estimate the net economic benefits these farmers have experienced from investing in soil health practices, such as no-till, strip-till, cover crops, and nutrient management, and quantified the water quality and climate benefits of these practices using USDA's nutrient tracking tool and Comet Farm tool. We're hopeful these case studies will help other farmers decide investing in these practices is worth the risk, and we continue to do them with other cropping systems and other geographies. From the first 8 case studies completed, we saw that yields for all 8 farmers increased from 2 to 22%. The 6 field crop farmers improved their bottom line by an average of $41 per acre per year. And due to the high value of almond crops, those California growers saw an increase in annual net income of $824 per acre. The average return on investment for the 8 farmers was 207%, meaning that, on average, case study participants received over $3 back for every dollar they invested. All 8 farmers saw improved water quality outcomes and reduced soil and water runoff on their fields due to the practices. The nutrient tracking tool estimated that soil health practices implemented on each field on average reduced nitrogen losses 43%, and phosphorus losses by 74%, and sediment losses by 81%. Estimations from Comet Farm indicated that total greenhouse gas emission reductions for 5 of the 6 crop farmers averaged 217% and was 28% for the 2 almond growers. We also work by uniting coalitions and influencing policy. We bring together farm and conservation interests to advance policies that enable agriculture to be a central climate solution. This is hard work. It takes relationships, networks, many hours, good ideas, articulate people, and science-based recommendations to inform the policy. At AFT, we do this on both the state and federal levels. We have done this as the first impact partner with the U.S. Climate Alliance, where we developed this CARPE tool and use it to develop these maps and other tools that member states use to inform state policy and integrate agricultural or working land solutions to state climate action plans. And we've done this at the state level. For example, knowing of the multiple benefits of cover crops, AFT worked with the Illinois Department of Agriculture and other stakeholders to develop a crop insurance premium discount program for farmers planting cover crops in the states. For 2 years running now, there's been a line item in the Illinois Department of Ag budget to fund this premium discount program for cover crops. Applicants receive a $5 insurance discount on the following year's crop insurance invoice for every acre of cover crop enrolled and accepted in the program. This will help the state meet its nutrient loss reduction goals while simultaneously incentivizing farmers to develop more resilient operations through cover crops. It's a win-win-win situation where research and work on the ground with farmers drove policy discussions and implementation, which in turn is driving greater adoption of cover crops within the state. In fact, it's been so successful that there have been 135,000 acres oversubscribed in 2021. And the federal government has just come out with a pandemic cover crop program as part of a pandemic relief bill that uses the same idea. It will help farmers maintain their cover crop systems despite the financial challenges posed by the pandemic. Premium support of $5 an acre will be deducted from the crop insurance premium owed by the producer, just like the state program. And finally, we work on the ground at the local and regional level by directly partnering with farmers, ranchers, and landowners, as well as the professionals who support them, to increase the adoption of regenerative ag practices across the country. We share our research findings and modeling tools on the ground with farmers, train them on the effective application and scale-up of these findings, and support them in sharing these outcomes with one another in peer-to-peer networks and various projects, such as our Genesee River Demonstration Farms Network in New York and our Sustainable Grazing Project in Virginia. In summary, we successfully use research to quantify impacts of regenerative ag practices on soil health, climate benefits, and farm operation economics through on-farm research and modeling. We work directly with farmers to implement these practices and try out new ideas, and we develop recommendations for policymakers at the state and federal level that together serve to further promote farmland protection, regenerative agricultural practices, and land access and transfer for a new generation of farmers and ranchers who need to take on and steward resilient operations. With these more resilient operations, American Farmland Trust believes we'll come closer to having the agricultural lands necessary to both provide for our food security as well as the ecosystem services needed for a healthier planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Very, very interesting presentation and on the basis of your several experience. We have the question in second part during the discussion. Thank you again. Next speaker is Tiago Pellini from Yapar Emater, Brazil. Tiago is agronomic engineering and a PhD in environmental economics and management, and working from 1992 at Instituto Paraná State, Brazil. Field areas are agricultural innovation assessment, economic analysis of integrated agricultural systems, study of structural aspects of farming system in support to public policy. Please, Tiago.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to share with you my presentation. My work here is a comparison between no-till adoption between the South and Central West Brazilian regions. My name is Tiago Pellini. I'm from Rural Development Institute of Paraná, researcher at socioeconomics area. The objective of the study was to analyze the adoption of no-till systems, NTS, by farmers, comparing the two most important agricultural regions in Brazil and considering classes of size. The data was based on the 2017 Brazilian Agricultural Census. Let's go to the context of the regions studied. Both regions, South and Central West, together participate with around 57% of the gross production value of the country and 78% of the total NTS area in Brazil. The questions we posed were, are the regions similar in terms of NTS adoption? And what comes out when the classes of holding size are considered? So let's see what we found out in the results. In general terms, we found out that the NTS adoption rate was substantially different between the regions. It was calculated by the number of farm holdings declaring to use NTS divided by the number of holdings using soil preparation. In the Central West, the number was of 20%, around this, very similar to the Brazilian average adoption rate, but in South region it was higher, achieving 58% of adoption. When you look at the classes of size that we investigated, we see that in the South region, for all classes above 5 hectares, NTS was predominant soil management system adopted. And for classes above 50 hectares in the South region, the rates were higher than 70%, as we see in this figure. But it's different in Central West, where the highest NTS rate we found was 42% for size class above 500 hectares. In more detail, we see what I said in this graph with the red bars for South region. Here we have the classes of size, and NTS is predominant, as I told you, in the classes from 5 hectares. Is more than 50%, so it's predominant type of technology adopted, and but it doesn't happen the same for the Central West regions, where the highest percentage we found was 42%. In terms of size of NTS area per farm, we found that for the classes up to 100 hectares in the two regions, the areas were similar in size. But for classes above 100 hectares, in Central West, these NTS areas were bigger. I will show you in detail in the next graph. So these are the classes when we found out similarity on size. But when you go to larger size of farms from 100 to 500 and 500 or more hectares, we identified that areas in Central West farms are bigger. And in case of these class above 500 hectares, it was 1.5 times in Central West the size compared to the South average area of NTS. Bringing something about the discussion we've promoted in this analyzing this data, we see the Cerrado, that is the biome representative of the Central West, is the target area in Brazil for efforts in mitigating greenhouse gases emissions. And we found, by our results, we find out that it's possible additional efforts in terms of public policies and voluntary schemes to increase the adoption of sustainable practices, especially NTS. But also these regions still is under the driving forces to that promote production of commodities for exports, mainly for exports, to meet a growing global demand of proteins, foodstuff, meat, and fibers. Also, we have to point out that the adoption of no-till in Brazil initiated in the 1960s in the South region, earlier than in the Central West. And this technology, although it fights soil erosion, is expanding, especially because of his characteristics of reduction of labor use and diminishing fuel and machinery costs. Also, the suppression, simplification of operations allow farmers to plant early in the crop season and enable them to have a second cultivation, which generally is soybean followed by maize. There are ongoing public policies and voluntary schemes that we can exemplify here and promote these conservation technologies. One is the Action Plan for Low Carbon Agriculture, the ABC plan. Another one is Integrated Corporate Livestock and Forest Network Association, which is a public-private partnership involving research bodies, cooperatives, and other companies. And this one is led by the Ministry of Agriculture. So they are examples of actions that could be strengthened in terms of promoting sustainable practices. Brazil has a high capacity to increase its agricultural production and has to do it in a sustainable way. We analyze in the discussion that in this period of 10 years between 2010 and 2020, the integrated crop, livestock, and forest increased by almost 14 million hectares in Brazil, and only NHS itself has increased by around 17 million hectares in 10 years, which is a substantial increase, I would say. The efforts for diffusion of conservation agricultural practices, particularly no-till, has to consider really in Brazil this enormous social, ecological, and agricultural systems diversity we have. We suggest for further study to better analyze factors that influence these adoption rates could explain the differences we identified in terms of behavior, in terms of size, classes of size of farms, which include farm typology, inland tenure situation, farming systems analysis, technical assistance and extension services provided, and also the climate factors, especially rainfall regime. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you very much, Tiago. Very interesting presentation, and in particular is impressive the increased surface on no-till practice in Brazil in the last 10 years. Thank you. The next speaker is Scott Day, Fall Line Capital, USA. Scott is a farmer and extension agronomist from Manitoba, Canada, but working and is the company based in San Francisco, California. And in the last 10 years, working on review and researching of new agriculture and food technology with the Fall Line. And now present how will new agricultural technology impact the future of conservation agriculture? Please, Scott.
Hello, friends and colleagues. It is an honor and a privilege to be speaking to you today as part of the 8th World Congress of Conservation Ag. Let me get right to it here. So my name is Scott Day, and I'm a farmer in Southwest Manitoba. I farm with my family here in the southwest corner of the province, but I'm also part of a farmland and ag tech investing company called Fall Line Capital that's based in San Francisco, California. And it's from this unique perspective that I'm going to share with you some of the technologies we've come across, and some of them we've actually invested in, that will have a profound effect on agriculture and conservation ag. First one I wanted to draw your attention to is Verge Ag. They're based in Calgary, and we invested in them last year as a company that was the first to provide pathway optimization for farmers to maximize time and energy efficiency in a field. You have a complicated looking field, lots of corners and obstacles, and they'll set up the pathways in which to travel with your implements that create the most efficient method. And in some cases, you're looking at 10, 15, even 20% less turns, less fuel, less time when you use their prescriptions rather than something that you may have just guessed at. But the impact conservation ag is that they're now starting to incorporate the topography of a field so that you can choose to use pathways that will minimize water movement on the soil. This will take into consideration time and energy efficiency as well, but you can optimize your movement of equipment on a field so that water movement is minimized. And I thought that was very profound and cool. And I urge you to check out their website and see how this is being done. It's very inexpensive. You simply provide them the legals of your field, and they'll send you back some suggestions, and you can modify them in real time and so on. But it doesn't matter what implement you're using, they can simply guide you in the most efficient way from time and energy, or to minimize erosion. All of us have seen, robots doing all kinds of things, making pizza, delivering coffee at coffee shops now. I saw a robot making popcorn in San Francisco at a theater. And you know that you're probably aware that they're making robots to weed crops and scout crops and fertilize crops. Now some of those companies are pivoting to doing some very specific things. And in this case, they're building robots to plant cover crops within fields. And this company, EarthSense, is actually making robots to phenotype research plots as well. You can phenotype a standard corn plot in about 6 seconds, which will have amazing results and speed things up with any sort of research and breeding. There's another company called Robot that does some cover crop planting as well. So they simply put a bin on the little robot, and it goes up and down. You could take a fleet of them, and they go up and down under the canopy planting your cover crop seed. They're looking at them to be self-tendering. They're relatively independent and autonomous, and they're cheaper than a ride-on lawnmower. So they could be used in many places of the world to plant cover crops within a canopy. And I just thought this was an ingenious idea to use a robot in this fashion. This company called Sound Ag, we invested in about 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. They're based in the Bay Area of San Francisco as well. They have 2 products that they're now just coming as a company into their prime. And the one on the right is a product called Source. It's on the market this year. And it's kind of, I like to call it synthetic biological. It's a product that improves the plant's ability to take up nutrients and improve fluid dynamics within a plant, and yet it's synthetic chemistry, and so it's more predictable and more resilient, and we're kind of excited to be a part of this. But for me, the most exciting aspect of this company is a completely different field of research and science, and it's on-demand breeding using modulation of the gene expression within a plant and using epigenetics as well. The picture is a standard heirloom tomato on the right that has a relatively short shelf life. And in 2 weeks of adjusting the gene expression, the amount of expression of certain genes, they were able to create an heirloom tomato that is shelf stable for more than twice the length of time that the standard one is. What this is an ability to change the amount of expression of a gene, kind of like wearing sunglasses or shades on a window. This is not gene editing. This is not introducing new genetic material. It's simply finding a way to modulate the expression of a gene through chemistry, through methylation of the genetic material. And the way it's delivered to the plant is in a seed treatment. So you simply treat the seed to create the traits that you want. And it's like, new varieties in a bottle. And you can create protein, specific protein levels in wheat if you wanted, or peas, or straw strength, or all kinds of things. This is the future, if it works out according to plan, of how plants and traits and varieties will be developed in the future. It's fascinating how fast they were able to do this and how it's being done in such a simple way. This is an image. This is the state of Iowa. This was last year when they had that giant windstorm that was called the Dorigo windstorm. And this is an image from a synthetic aperture radar image. This was an imaging system that was developed by the military and is now available to the general public. So they created this data, 1.25 million acres damaged, the makeup of the crops, the average age of the crops. They created all this data, all this image, this entire image in 1 hour. They can take pictures of any part of the earth on an hourly basis for very little cost with no impact from cloud cover or atmospheric conditions. So satellite images, drone images, cameras in planes, they're relatively inferior to this new type of technology that can take images on a very regular basis, regardless of atmospheric conditions. The impact for conservation ag is this could be where we're looking at monitoring carbon level in soil, carbon sequestration, or monitoring compliance with cover crops or other conservation ag requirements that may be part of this new carbon economy. There's companies that are using NAR spectrometry to evaluate soil carbon. There's other ways to do this as well. But this looks to be a really amazing tool when you look at large scale, anywhere on the earth, regular basis, to be able to do this. This will have impacts on crop management, crop scouting, weather, market forecasting, and of course, crop insurance itself, being able to evaluate damage like this in such a hurry. This is a company that we invested in a few years ago that does DNA testing of the soil. And there's DNA testing that is going to be available for virtually everything. This is how we got our COVID test, being able to do that so quickly. But being able to do an inexpensive, quick DNA test of the soil opens up this huge opportunity for farmers that are looking and researchers that are trying to find out how everything works together. And these are the reports we get back from Trace. This was from our own soil samples from some of our own farms in the United States. You see K solubilization, P solubilization, P mineralization, disease risk, organic matter, tremendous amount of information that will only become more useful as we use this more and become more aware of it. I encourage you to check out their website, Trace Genomics, DNA testing of your soil. There's other companies that do this as well, but this whole new world of cheap DNA tests are going to be very profound in agriculture. The last company I wanted to draw your attention to is Greenlight Bio. We invested in them a few years ago because they were anticipating making some crop pesticide products from mRNA technology. Wow, did this become a big thing? And of course, we all know about the COVID vaccines. Greenlight's been a part of that. They're looking at other vaccines for things like the common flu and so on, but they're also still focused on developing some products for crop protection. This is probably their first commercial product will be able to control Colorado potato beetle. And the way they do that is the RNA that they've been able to isolate prevents the beetle from digesting its food. It doesn't have any impact on any other insect or beneficial. Butterflies, bees are fine. And this whole world of peptides and amino acids and proteins and being used as pesticides is incredible because they're so effective, yet so inert in the environment. It's like creating weapons and tools from ice that simply melt to water when they're done. So I encourage you to check out their website and be aware of how impactful mRNA technology will be in agriculture and to everything, obviously human health as well. So that concludes my 10 minutes of rapid fire new tech. I encourage you to send me an email or check out our website that has some of these technologies that we did invest in, a little more information. That's a picture of me seeding my crop this spring in Manitoba. And I wish you all the best for the rest of the year, and I hope you have a great conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Very interesting overview on new technology for impact the future of conservation agriculture. Very, very interesting. And at last but not least, we have the next speaker, Sara Berzuini by University of Bologna, Italy. Sara is a PhD student at Department of Agro-Food Science and Technology and works in herbaceous crops area. And in particular, she focuses on oil crops for food and non-food purpose. In particular, she studied oilseed crops with low agronomical inputs with the aim to identify new sustainable agronomical system. Sara presents the preliminary results of MED project Camelina, a cash cover crop enhancing water and soil conservation in Mediterranean dry farming systems. Please, Sara.
Hi everybody, my name is Sara Berzuini. I'm a PhD student from Uniboi, and today I will present you the first CMED project that is a project funded by Prima Program and coordinated by Professor Monti from Uniboi. The name of this project is Camelina, a cash cover crop enhancing water and soil conservation for Mediterranean dry farming systems. The scope of this project is to develop Mediterranean innovative, diversified and resilient farming systems, not competing for land with actual food chain, following a participatory approach for identifying smallholder needs while planning, monitoring, and evaluating the project actions. The first CMED systems are modified conventional farming systems, including Camelina, a promising oilseed crop for Europe as a cash cover crop, which might increase farmers' revenue while enhancing soil and water conservation. In particular, the inclusion of Camelina as a cash cover crop within conventional Mediterranean farming systems will match environmental benefits related to cover crop attitude and additional revenue to farmers that can get profits selling seeds, oil, and protein. Among the other cover crops, Camelina was chosen as more suitable for the Mediterranean climate, being extremely drought tolerant, very suitable for conservation agriculture, and characterized by short growth cycle, allowing double cropping systems in several environments. The consortium, the first MED consortium, was conceived in order to follow a multi-actor approach. The consortium includes 11 partners from 7 different countries, in particular 4 European countries that are Spain, France, Italy, and Greece, and 3 non-European countries that are Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. Among the partners are included research organizations, universities, and farmers' cooperatives. The consortium is well balanced, with 7 partners belonging from the research and development and 4 others representing the productive world. Camelina was chosen because it is native to Europe. It belongs to the Brassicacea family, and it is a low input crop. Camelina is extremely drought tolerant and able to establish also in dry soil. It is poorly shattering, and its seeds have high content of both oil and protein. In particular, oil content ranges between 35 and 40%. Moreover, the oil composition has a high content of polyunsaturated fatty acids, which usually lack in the Mediterranean diet. Moreover, Camelina cake is highly required by livestock market as feed ingredient. The objectives of the FORCIMED project are divided through the different work packages. In particular, in work package 1, we aim to identify the social economic barriers and local conditions to stimulate the diffusion of conservation agriculture in Mediterranean region using a participatory approach based on local multi-stakeholder platforms. Moreover, in work package 2, we aim to identify and optimize and test under real operational conditions the locally tailor-made FORCIMED solutions, using Camelina as a cash cover crop. Moreover, we would like to demonstrate to local stakeholders, so farmers, researchers, and students, the feasibility of the proposed tailor-made FORCIMED solution through several training and field days in order to show them this crop and build new skills. In work package 4, we will do environmental assessing in order to observe current system and the new one proposed by FORCIMED. And then finally, the work package 5 is dedicated to the dissemination and to transfer FORCIMED results to the stakeholders. This is the structure of the project, and that is divided in 6 work packages that are combined through all. Then we have the preliminary results. In particular, the FORCIMED project established in its participating country a local multi-stakeholder platforms, including farmers, practitioners, long-term conservation agriculture adopters, scientists, representatives from farmers associations, and political venues. The first consultation was carried out during summer 2020 at the scope of engaging local stakeholders in the co-design tailor-made FORCIMED solution. And moreover, in its participating country, different field trials have been successfully established during autumn-winter 2020. It was the first time that Camelina was sown in Northern African countries, and as you can see in the photos, it established very well through all the conditions and all the trials. The FORCIMED project has very challenging objectives, but the close cooperation among all partners permit to achieve a significant progression in the implementation of conservation agriculture in the Mediterranean dry farming systems. The choice of Camelina as a cash cover crop to widespread the acceptance of conservation agriculture among smallholders is challenging. But the whole FORCIMED consortium will actively cooperate to achieve it. The co-design of the FORCIMED systems by the engagement of the local stakeholders will permit to easily develop the achievement of the results for improving the well-being of the rural communities in the Mediterranean regions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sara, for your presentation. It's very interesting, these new crops for conservation agricultural systems, in particular for the rain-fed conditions is a good opportunity for to spread the conservation agriculture and for to respect the principle of minimum soil disturbance, crop rotation, and soil cover. Thank you. We have several questions, and I would like to thank all speakers for a very clear presentation and a very interesting perspective and the challenge for conservation agriculture, with a different approach and different experience worldwide from to solve the problems and have the new opportunity for conservation agriculture for the future. I think we have about 50 minutes for discussion, and I start with the questions on the platform. The first question is for Emilio González. You mentioned that the use of glyphosate increase in no-till. What about the impact on selective post-emergence herbicide? Do you expect an increase of tillage or a switch to other chemical tools for weed controls? Please, Emilio.
Thank you for the question. Maybe you misunderstood, because I did not say that the use of glyphosate increases, rather the opposite in conservation agriculture and in no-till. The question is very good, because I've mentioned more about the pre-emergence and what's happening after the crop is established. To be very quick in the answer, because we don't have much time, if the three principles of conservation agriculture are applied in the midterm, we expect less pressure of weeds on the crop, both pre-emergence or preceding and post-emergence as well. Because if we leave a lot of residues, if we are rotating crops, especially with a good amount of residues, weeds will have more difficulties in emerging. Thank you, Michele.
Thank you, Emilio. And I have one question for Óscar. You mentioned that the stocks of organic carbon is reduced by between 25% and 75%, depending on climate and location. Based on your experience with the Agromitiga project, would it take long to restore these degraded soil back to their optimal status?
Okay, thank you for the question. Well, we do not yet have a sufficient amount of data to conclude which soil or climatic characteristics enhance the zinc effect of conservation agriculture. We can say that the temperature and humidity are determining factors. We see that mild temperatures together with high humidity favor the mineralization processes of organic matter and therefore reduce the organic carbon content in the soil. So we believe that in climates where these two conditions are not met, more carbon will be sequestered. However, what we can say is that conservation agriculture sequesters more carbon than conventional tillage, regardless of the climate.
Thank you for your reply. And I have one question for Beth. The first question is the regenerative and the conservation agriculture and other terms. It is important now to clear which is the approach system and not add other terms to have a confusion in and the impact of terms for the agriculture.
Wait, Was that a question or a comment?
But use the regenerative in aid to conservation agriculture, or you instead regenerative or conservation agriculture?
Is the question, can they be used interchangeably?
Yes.
I guess it depends how one is defining one or the other. If conservation agriculture is being defined in a way that you're including the economic and social aspects as well as the biological aspects of the system, then probably yes, it could be used interchangeably. I would definitely agree that this becomes one of the challenges, right? People use conservation agriculture, they use regenerative ag, climate smart practices, carbon, what did someone use? Carbon smart or carbon storage practices, and other practices. And I think it's important that we are clear with what we mean when we're using the terms. But I think sometimes we also use different terms depending on the audience, because a different term might resonate with different audiences. But it's a good and valid question.
Yes, it's very complex because we have many terms for the same objective, but now is very important to evaluate which is the results of the agricultural system. And the regenerative and the conservation agriculture maybe have the same objective, but is different the approach and perspective. But it's very interesting your case study for reduce in nitrogen loss by over 40%, phosphorus by 70%, and over 80% loss in sediment. But you are very clear if it is necessary the support for these practices, or is only for the farmer oriented?
Ask that again, the support for the practices.
Only for to reduce the tillage depth, or for to including the tillage systems for to obtain these results you showed in your presentation?
To obtain those results, the farmers were including cover crops and in some cases doing no-till within their cropping system.
Yes,
so,
the management systems is necessary for to obtain these results. This is very important for the adoption and for two new introduction of conservation agriculture in other part of in agricultural area. But is very important, which is the extension transfer of technology and experience.
Yes. And that's the reason that we did these case studies, so that different farmers using different cropping systems in different parts of the country could see data or results from farmers who are operating systems relatively similar to theirs. You know, many farmers learn from one another. And so if you can see what one of your peers or colleagues has done, then that's sort of a way of helping to do extension and outreach, is by developing these case studies that we share with other farmers as well as with agricultural service providers, so they can help with that outreach.
Thank you, Beth. I have one question for Scott. Scott, you are a conservation agricultural farmer and have over 10 years of experience in review and researching hundreds of new agricultural technology with four-line capital. Is there one new technology appropriate for conservation agriculture that you are particularly excited about it?
Yeah, I'll mention that with Fall Line, we also own a considerable amount of farmland in the U.S., and we manage it with conservation ag techniques. So we have farmland that we manage. It's kind of a separate part of the business, and then we have ag tech, and we actually test some of the ag tech on our farmland that helps us be, I guess, a more effective investor. As far as one that stands out, it is an exciting time. Certain things have come together that make all these other things possible. This inexpensive genetic testing, this ability to design proteins, these other aspects that allow monitoring to be so precise and inexpensive as well. But I would say the most exciting thing right now is this new opportunity to create crop protection products from various types of proteins, whether it's an mRNA product or a peptide that mimics an insecticide. They're incredibly effective and relatively safe on the environment and very inexpensive to make. And I know that this will have a profound effect on how all farming is done in the next 10 years. Is this next I guess, generation of pest control. Whether it's insects, there's ways to control insects with the technology. The diseases, there's products they're working on with these type of proteins to control insects. And then, of course, weed control. This has huge implications as far as resistance management, cost of production, market acceptance. All these sort of things are going to be very, very impactful and will be a big part of how all people farm in the future. This will impact animal agriculture as well and human health.
Many technology are high-tech, and I wonder how accessible these are to farmers on ground in terms of availability and the price, the cost.
In my presentation, the 5 companies I picked were all their products are either really inexpensive to make or relatively inexpensive to access. You know, even the robots are becoming, as I said, cheaper than a lawnmower. So when you compare that to traditional farm equipment, planters or tractors or whatever, it's a different category altogether. The beauty of these, let's say, protein products is you can create them in fermenters and through fermentation, so the cost of production is very low, and so you can tailor the commercial cost to be whatever the market can absorb, and much less expense than some of the synthetic products we use today. Even older ones are quite expensive to make, and you know, even that pathway optimization software. Of course, if you have GPS, it works with that. But it costs pennies an acre to get a map that tells you which direction to go to minimize water erosion. If you were to do that somehow mechanically with a survey and all that sort of expert work being done on a farm or on a field, that'd be very expensive. Now, in a push of a button, in a few seconds, you can get a map that tells you where your risks lie and how to minimize those risks. So I was trying to focus on technologies that could be applied anywhere on the earth without a lot of expense. That SAR technology is fascinating as well, and is almost free at this point to get those images. It's the technology needed to process the images and make them available, but the actual images themselves are not expensive.
Thank you, Scott, for your comments. And I have another question for Emilio. The current authorization of glyphosate at European level ends in 2022. Which is the probably impact if don't have the authorization after next year for conservation agricultural adoption during the period of the Green Deal, Farm Fork strategy, and other different legislation to reduce the chemical products and the impact in terms of the cost for the other herbicide?
Well, that's that's $1 million question. It's last week, I think it was precisely 1 week ago, there was a document that that has been published by the regulatory group. In concrete, it's the AGG, which is the assessment group on glyphosate, where 4 countries, including France, Sweden, Netherlands, and Hungary, has published their results after reviewing, thousands of documents, scientific documents around glyphosate. And their recommendation is it's suitable, the active ingredient, it's suitable for the renewal. So that was science says, but as Gottlieb has mentioned, sometimes we find conflicting objectives, policies, I would say probably not only in Europe, but elsewhere as well. So as I have presented, if glyphosate is not renewed, that again, according to science, it should be, the point is the future is uncertain, because how are we going to increase carbon in our soils if farmers are going back to plow because they don't have tools for controlling weeds? How are we going to improve biodiversity, soil fauna, if we keep on tilling, intensively tilling our soils? So the future is uncertain, although, and as I mentioned before, last week document, it seems that science is again on the side of the renewal of glyphosate in Europe.
Thank you very much, Emilio. I have only one short question for Sara. Sara, stay here.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, Sara, in your presentation, you mentioned the challenge for growing Camelina using conservation agriculture system. But in your test, you introduce conservation agricultural systems, or you have the past use of conservation agriculture, and you are in transition phase?
Yes, we are in a transition phase. We have some trials. In Bologna, we have some trials that started last year, and we are trying to transit to no-till. So this is the first year, and even for the other partners, I think that we are trying to move to conservation agriculture. So
you're testing only Camelina, or you have other crops in comparison?
We are testing only Camelina because yes, we have a great experience here in Bologna. Some years of testing, and so we are focusing on that because we think that it's a crop with a great potential for conservation agriculture. So I think that it is important that farmers through Europe and even through Africa know and try to cultivate it, because I think it could be a great alternative.
Thank you very much for your reply. And at the end of this very interesting session, I would like to thank all speakers, and particular thanks to John Geraghty, is a rapporteur of this session, for your supporting and activity under the presentation and the production system. Thank you again, and have a good afternoon to have the next session of Congress. Thank you. Goodbye.